bring them all together. And when we have that meeting, we shape our meeting around the 4 priorities, and they see it. It's right there, front and center. Okay, folks, we're talking now about faith formation, and they get it. And the pin that I wear is a constant reminder, not only of our love of Jesus, because it's a heart with a cross through it, but it's also a reminder of our 4 colors and the 4 board priorities. So everything kind of fits together, and I think we've done a great job. And once again, I attribute our success to the power of team to remind people this is what we're all about in the Calgary Catholic School District.
Here's my problem. I have so many amazing guests and interviews that I've recorded that I always have a challenging time trying to figure out who I'm going to share with you this week. This was another one of those tough calls. But don't worry, everyone's going to get out there. But this week, I get to share with you CEO Superintendent Bryan Szumlas of Calgary Catholic. Now, I will tell you this. Bryan does now officially hold the record for the longest podcast, but I don't see any reason to cut anything because it's just all so amazing. Bryan brings this energy to not just our conversation, but I know to his work that I think you're going to pick up on very quick. He is so passionate about the way in which systems function and how they, when they're functioning well, support teaching and learning. And he really understands that, sees that, and lives that. And that's a big part of our conversation today. This episode, as always, brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships. We do really good work all over North America. We are really moving into the AI space pretty quickly with some great expertise and thoughtfulness around that. But that's just one of many things that we do. So reach out if that's something that you're curious about. I'd love to talk more with you about that. And again, just great organization. So proud of being able to work with so many really gifted people, passionate, caring people. Bryan is another one of these gifted, passionate educators that I was thrilled to have on the show. So I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Bryan Szumlas. Hey, Bryan, you just you talked about some interesting ways in which you're starting the school year as a result of COVID. So 2 things, right? One, what was it like to start a superintendency like seconds before COVID started? I think it was almost seconds. And the second part of that question, what did you learn from COVID that you're still doing today?
Well, thank you, Dean, and hello, everyone. I'm Bryan Szumlas, the Chief Superintendent of the Calgary Catholic School District. And I guess to start by answering your first question, I'd have to say it was a little unnerving, beginning my term with COVID. So to put it in perspective, folks, I started on March the 1st, 2020, and I knew that I was appointed as the Chief Superintendent in late November, so several months before March. And during that period of time, I was transitioning with the then current Chief Superintendent, and I'm really appreciative for all of the feedback and guidance that individual provided to me. But during that period of time, we had absolutely zero conversations about this thing called COVID. In fact, no one was really talking about it. Occasionally on the news, you would hear about this illness that was happening over in China. And so my first day, March the 1st, 2 weeks later on March the 14th, I found myself part of a conference call with the Alberta Education, and we ended up closing schools the following Monday. And interestingly enough, it was during a period of time where the other school jurisdictions were on their Easter break. But being a Catholic school district, we organized our break with the actual Easter week. And so our schools were in session, or would have been in session, but we closed. And so having to deal with all of this closure. And so, it's not something I would wish upon anyone, but I'm so proud of the team that I worked with on the weekend. When we first heard the news, we all came together. And I guess that's one of the things I learned through COVID is you're never alone. Like, you need to rely upon the teams that you have and work through many of the different issues. And that's what we did. all through COVID, we had regular team meetings. We discussed because things were constantly changing. In fact, one of the phrases that I used is, things change minute by minute, day by day, month by month, and so we'll really work hard to keep people posted throughout the changes that occurred. I think back when I think back of the whole COVID experience, like that was a huge tragedy that happened in the world. Many families lost loved ones, people lost jobs, people lost homes. And so there were many terrible things that happened with COVID. But I think in the world of education, there's some goodness that came about. It was an opportunity for a huge reset for us to really think about what we had been doing in education and what we could do better or do differently. A great example, when I first started, even a month before I started, I was talking to my future team about moving forward with online education because in the Calgary Catholic School District, we offered online education for our high school students, but not for our elementary or junior high. And I received a little bit of pushback from folks saying, well, that's going to be too difficult. Change takes time. We can't move forward by implementing something that big so fast. And so, I didn't want to stress my new team out right away by saying, no, I don't care about that. We're going to do it. Like, I'm not that type of leader. I want to do it with people rather than to
Right.
people. Although I do know in leadership, there are times when you do have to be the heavy and make the hard decisions. And so we kind of left that conversation with we would phase in a grade at a time. And so we were
Right.
going to start with like grade 9 and build upon our high school that we already had. And then along came COVID, and it was a great opportunity to say, well, that plan's out the window. We need to start coming up in September from grades 1 to 9. And so, in a very short period of time, we were able to pull it off. We opened a school called St. Isidore. And in the first year of COVID, we had over 7,000 students registered in St. Isidore Online School. To put that in perspective, folks, Calgary Catholic, we're sitting at 61,000 students right now. We have 118 schools, just under 6,000 staff. We're the largest Catholic school division in the province of Alberta. And so we were able to make this school and make it work and provide quality Catholic education online. And now that we've come out of COVID, COVID still exists in the world. Please don't think it doesn't. It does, but we still have online education. And so St. Isidore remains open. We don't have 7,000 students. We're down to about 500. But for those 500 students, it's a family choice, and it is something that we continue to provide. So that's just one example of something that we've learned through COVID-19.
Well, you also mentioned your staggered starts was a result of COVID. Can you just talk a little bit about, because this is the start of school right now, and I don't know when people are watching this. It may be in October when they watch this, but the way you start school has been impacted by COVID.
Yeah, there's been many things impacted, and you're absolutely right. Prior to us starting the recording today, we were just having a friendly chit chat here, and today is the second day of classes in the Calgary Catholic School District. And one of the things that we put in place with COVID was a staggered entry to beginning the school year, because there's lots of just imagine, traditionally all the kids show up on that first day, and teachers are expected just to jump into it right away. When if we take a step back, how about having half the class come in one day and the other half of the class come in the next day, and then on day 3 they all come together? Because we know that classes, I don't know what it's like across the rest of Canada, but here in Alberta, class sizes continue to grow. We're not opening as many new schools, but we continue to see an influx of students. We're growing at about 3%, just over 3% a year. So we're welcoming over 2,000 new students a year. And if we're not opening any new schools, like, we're still utilizing the same number of classrooms to fit those kids in, which
Yeah.
results in larger class sizes. So having a staggered entry just gives the teachers a little bit more one-on-one time at the very beginning of the school years, so that they can introduce some of the critical routines to a smaller group of students than the entire class all at once.
Well, and that, along with the online school and learning opportunities you've created, are, as you've said, great examples of things we've learned and things we now implement. When I think about, and I interviewed a lot of schools and know a lot of leaders across Canada and the United States, there was at early-ish in COVID a lot of optimism around, oh, this is an opportunity to change the way we're doing school. So forward-thinking educators like yourself saw opportunities. However, in the vast majority, I think, of cases, many of those good ideas fell aside and are not implemented, have not continued. I think specifically about online education that there are many places that just have not been able to maintain that. What do you, I don't know if you've reflected on this, but what do you think is perhaps different in your context that said, no, we're actually thinking about these things that are going to make the experience of learning and the experience of teaching better for people if we continue and we adopt these new ideas? Like what is it about Calgary Catholic or your leadership that you think helped maintain and implement good practice?
I think that it starts at the top with the individual that's in the position that I'm in, and I'm so grateful to have this position. And I'm surrounded by a fabulous team of superintendents, and it needs to start there because I've always said we're not going to go back to normal. We're not going to go back to where we were before COVID. We need to create a new normal going forward. We need to reflect upon and I've always been that type of individual through my career. This is my 33rd year in education. I've held many different type of leadership positions. In fact, the first 5 years, that's where I was a classroom teacher. I taught every elementary grade, combined grade. And then I went into assistant principalship. And so for the remainder of this time, I've been in educational leadership. And it takes me back to, I've had the privilege of opening 2 new schools, one as a vice principal, one as a principal. And I remember when I opened a school as a principal, I said to my superintendent at the time, I want to try something different. And there was a book called Yardsticks written by Chip Wood. And in that book, he talks about milk consumption and how if we just changed how we did our lunch hour procedures, maybe the kids would eat more lunch. And so, in a traditional school, lunchtime, happens. And in Chip Wood's recommendation is that there's more milk consumption if the kids go outside and play first, and then they come back in after they've exhausted themselves and have a chance to settle down and eat their lunch. And so I told my superintendent, hey, I wanted to try this. And she said, well, Bryan, I don't know, like is this a hill for you to die on? Like the pushback from the parents. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to work with my school council and my parents. We're going to give this a try. And so we did that. And we found it to be very successful that the kids, ate more of their lunches, drank more of their milk and other healthy products. And so I use that example to show that throughout my career, I've always been a person who's willing to take a risk, to try something different. I think back when you asked about COVID, what else have we learned or continue beyond COVID? And another great example is even parent-teacher interviews, where during COVID, we moved to all of our parent-teacher interviews happened online in the world of Zoom or through a Microsoft Teams meeting. And, obviously there's something to be had with a face-to-face interaction with a parent in the classroom. But here in Canada, asking parents to drive in the winter time to arrange for daycare for their children, blah, blah, blah. Like there are some huge challenges for our families. So now in the world beyond COVID, we give our parents a choice where many of our teachers, they will have face-to-face, like and that was pre-COVID, but post-COVID, they also have opportunities to do their interviews online. And so that's another
That's
essential
awesome.
learning coming out of COVID as well.
Yeah, no, that's great, Bryan, and I just so appreciate those examples because again, I saw opportunity for some of these things, and I mean I know that the nature of your role as CEO superintendent is highly political in many cases, and you're juggling a lot of priorities, you're juggling a lot of stakeholders. One of the stakeholders, of course, is our provincial governments, and Alberta, like a lot of other provinces, has had some pretty big swings in provincial governments and ministries of education, and yet I see some stability regardless of who's running the government in Alberta in particular. How do you navigate that in terms of the ministry is going to come on with their various priorities because of their political leanings? How do you in Calgary Catholic maintain the vision and mission that you have regardless of what the ministry says? I just wonder if you have any thoughts on how you sort of balance that tension that can exist.
Yeah, I think one of the keys is relationship, and I'm a lucky man or a lucky chief superintendent to work with an amazing board. So the board of trustees, we have six individuals who lead Calgary Catholic, and I report directly to them as their sole employee. And they've done a really good job, and so too has administration of having real positive relationships. Like, even though the government may make a decision that we may not necessarily agree with, just like in my position, I may make a decision that teachers or principals may not agree with. You still, at the end of the day, need to respect the decision maker, try to understand why the decision was made the way it was made, and then try to, through relationships, try to influence in a positive way a change. And so here in Alberta, we've had massive curriculum renewal where each year we've been introducing new curriculum in elementary, something that hasn't happened for many years. Like, typically you renew one curriculum, several years go by, and then you may introduce another. This year we're implementing grades 4 to 6 English, language, arts, and literature, as well as grades 4 to 6 mathematics, grades 1 to 3 French language, arts, and literature. A year and a bit ago, like last year, we were implementing K-3 language arts and K-3 math. So we have all of these changes, but originally the government wanted to introduce science, social studies, like everything all at
Right.
once. And so because we had a very positive relationship, we were able to say, hey, like, that's going to crash the system. We need to slow it down a bit. And they listened. Right. And I attribute that to the fact of having positive relationships. The board of trustees meet regularly with the MLAs here in Calgary, as well as Alberta education officials, and have that, nurturing of a great relationship.
You've already touched on the fact that Calgary Catholic is a significantly larger district than many, 61,000 students, I believe you said. One of the challenges that I often see in larger urban districts is how do you make the district priorities not just something that lives on a website or in a cited document, but something that's actually lived throughout the day and something that actually can bring people together, like that it's a unifying documents and unifying theme and culture, those kind of things. Like, how do you do that in a large district? Because it's not easy.
You're hitting on my passion here, and so I'm going to go on a little story. But as I was watching you ask the question, I noticed you're moving your hands around kind of like this, and it takes me back to my interview for the chief superintendency. And so we know that we can put our hands together to make the letter C like this. And this is actually what I did at my interview. And I said, okay, folks, please do this with me. And then take your other hand and make a backward C, and you put them together. And what do you have there? And you have that heart, and the heart of Jesus. And a little catchphrase that I shared in my interview package was, let's create Calgary Catholic together, right? And we're creating it with God's love. Prior to me becoming the chief superintendent, I was in a position called area director. That meant I was responsible for the operations of about 25 schools. And when I would go out to sit down to talk to a principal about their school plans and what they were trying to achieve there, they would put together a huge package and be so proud. Bryan, here's my school plan, and you'll see everything's in order. And I said, okay, this looks fantastic. But if I was to call the next teacher who walks by the office into your office and ask them, what are you trying to do here? What is, your mission, your vision? What are the priorities you're trying to achieve? Would they be able to share some of these things that you're talking to me about? And the principals, typically their head would go down and they go, probably not. Right. And I said to them, and I personally reflected upon this for a long time, that, the school plan document, even a district plan document, It was a make work project for the leaders, and people weren't really buying into it. So as I started as chief superintendent, I said, okay, first of all, folks, we're going to create things together, and less is more. Less is more. We had if so you have to know your current reality if you're going to change any organization, right? And the current reality of Calgary Catholic when I first started is they had about just over 20 different things they were trying to achieve. And let's call them the focal points. And it was just getting so scattered. It was going in every different direction. I like to think of it as a plate overflowing with food, right? Like, if we all know, if you eat too much, obesity, you're going to be unhealthy, diabetes, not good, right? So in fact, one of my good friends, Dr. Leroy Sloan, he talks about in the world of policy, he talks about you got to purge the baby. If you keep on making policy, but you never delete policy, the baby's going to just explode, right? We all know how good you feel, when you purge something, right? And so going back to if it comes down to alignment. And so how do you align a whole district if you want to move them forward around your priorities? I think it really starts with a good mission and vision statement. And I talked about you need to know your current reality. So in Calgary Catholic, our mission was to live and learn in our Catholic faith. But connected to mission is our vision. And so as I talk to people about mission and vision, there's lots of confusion. I love the work of Simon Simic. I think he does a really good job with the golden circle of narrowing it down and bringing people together. But I like to reflect upon my own personal experience where I have a daughter and a son. My son was in the military for 5 years, and I like to use this example as I explain to people the difference between a mission and a vision. So let's think of the great tragedy that's happening in the world right now, of the war in Ukraine and Russia. So if we had a vision, what would that vision be for if the best were to happen in that part of the world? It would be peace. That these groups of people could live in peace and harmony. That's a great vision. So that's what we're striving to achieve. And our mission, well, how are we going to get there? How are we going to get to that vision? So that goes back to your mission now. And it could be like a military mission where, the soldiers, like my son was, their mission is they need to, take over this particular town and bring about peace in the town. And that's going to move them closer to the vision. So I'm going to start by framing it that way. And then when I think of education in the Calgary Catholic District, if our mission is to live and learn in our Catholic faith, well, what is our vision? What are we trying to achieve? And interestingly, when I was an area director, I would ask the principal, okay, what is it that we're trying to do here in Calgary Catholic? And they had a hard time articulating the vision. And it's no one's fault, but it was way too long. It was like 3 paragraphs, and it just wasn't something that you could, drill down or memorize. And I think it's so key that in the organization, no matter what position you have, what level you're at, that you know what we're trying to do here. And so in our district, we spent about just over a year, because even though I had in my mind, okay, this is what I think it is, for me just to write it down and say, okay, everyone, here it is, buy into it, let's all do this, right? Like, this is why you wake up in the morning and go to work, that we need, if we're going to create it together, we needed to get input from people, from all of our teachers, all the staff, from our trustees, right? Because at the end of the day, the board of trustees, this is a big part of their leadership, is to own the mission and the vision statements. In fact, it's outlined in Policy 1 here in our jurisdiction. And so I came up with this little activity. We live and learn in our Catholic faith with these 2 key words: so that. And maybe someday I'll write a book on that, because I think so that is so important. So that what? Because so why? It really gets down to the why. And we know, we've all, as leaders, we've all heard the importance of the why. And so people, they filled in this little activity. They sent us lots of feedback. We actually hired an external consultant who gathered all of this feedback and put it into themes. And at the end of the day, it resulted in so that students centered in Christ realize their full potential. So I'll say that again. so that students centered in Christ realize their full potential. So that makes a lot of sense because we are a Catholic district. So we know that, what we're trying, our why, like why do we get up in the morning? Why do we come to work? It has to do with our students. So it's really good that our students are centered in Christ and we're a Catholic board. That makes a lot of sense. And we want every kid to realize their full potential, no matter their ability level. And so once we were able to come up with a really solid, memorable, exciting mission and vision, then from there we were able to look at the priorities. Okay, flowing out of that, what are the board priorities? I brought with me today here, this is the visual that we've come up with. You'll notice it has 4 different colors, and you'll also notice that we have a district pin that has the 4 different colors on it as well. And so we have a lot of these visuals that help us know the board's priorities.
What I wanted to follow up with that is, because I think it's so critical that there's this unifying piece, and I see it in large districts where people really, and it is true to a certain extent, that people don't care about, this is Marcus Buckingham's book on the 9 lies about work. And one of the lies is that people care about the company they work for. And his point is they actually don't. They care about the team they're on, because it's just too big. You work for some massive company and it's like, that's awesome that I work for Google or whatever. But actually what makes me come to work every day is the individuals that I spend every day with and we do our work with. So there's this work that has to be done to distill this down to the individual, so that individuals, teams, schools in your case, buy into, understand, and live out that mission and vision, but at the same time personalize it to some degree. I remember hearing and I don't know, I can't attribute the person, but I remember a story about a middle school teacher where their priority was to have every kid be able to answer the question, why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? And this principal would stop kids in the hallway and just randomly say, hey, why are you here? And if they couldn't say with clarity why they're here, he'd say, let's go back to my office, not as a punishment, but let's review why you're here, so that you leave there knowing, like, this is why I come to school every day. And maybe for one kid it was, well, I want to become a scientist one day, or I want to be the first person in my family to graduate. Whatever their personal mission was critical to that. So I guess that's the other part of this is how do you take this large division mission that you've worked so hard in getting people to buy in and understand, and then let them take that at their individual or school level to really own it themselves.
No, I love that. And I love the story that you just shared, because I would love to, in addition to asking staff, just like you said, ask students like that key question. So a staff member should say in Calgary Catholic, I'm here so that to help students know Christ and to help them realize their full potential. And
Right.
students should say, I'm here to learn about God and I'm here to do my very best, right, in their learning. So from the mission and vision, then the next step is the formulation of the board priorities. And so in the Calgary Catholic School District, we have 4 board priorities, as I kind of highlighted here on this visual. And I think it's really key to have good visuals that are prominent in many different places. So throughout a school, throughout your central office, it's not something that just sits on your desk, although that's a nice place for it to be too. So you're constantly reminded of it. Like here in my office, it's on the wall right by my chair. So I'm looking at it all the time. And the color coding of these things is really important as well, because in our 3-year plan, in our 3-year education plan, if we look at the color red, so all of the headers on a page and the footers of the page are red, and that has to do with the board priority on faith formation. And in that particular area, we have 3 critical points. We want all of our staff and students to know God. We are a community of caring, so we have community of caring leads in our schools. They plan and do different activities. And then finally, we want Catholic education to endure in the province of Alberta. So we work closely with our families on that, and understanding, that this is a right given to Catholics, through the formation, the, Constitution, right? Um, when it comes to, like you had mentioned too, in a very large organization with 118 schools, we need to ensure that people, that this isn't just something that sits on their desk. How are we getting it in front of them all the time? How are we having conversations about this, right? How do we get that buy-in? And so from our 4 areas, and the other 3s were student successes, wellness, and Indigenous education. And so as schools shape their school plans, they're shaping their plans around the district's 4 areas, and they may do a deeper dive into one of the areas more so than another area. So, for example, when it comes to the area of student successes, one of the focal points has to do with assessment. And so, as in our school jurisdiction, we've been really working hard on reassessment opportunities. So, for example, a person can fail their driver's license several times, but eventually they get their license. And the same thing here in education is, you may fail that math test 2 times, but on the third time, it may just click and you're going to get it, right? And so let's not penalize kids for their first 2 failures. Let's help them and help them be successful. And not all assessments have to be the same. At one point in my career, I was the board chair of the Alberta Assessment Consortium, so I could talk way longer about assessment. But when we look at our 4 priorities here and those colors, I also shape my district meetings around the 4 board priorities. And I always start my meeting by reminding people of our mission and vision statements. It's on a slide. Coming out of COVID, like during COVID, we did all of our leadership meetings online, right? And prior to COVID, we did all of our meetings in person. Well, guess what? It's kind of like a pendulum, right? On one side, all in person, on the other side, all online. So now the pendulum has landed in the middle. So now that we're out of COVID, our new normal is some meetings are online. I don't expect you to drive. I don't have to rent the place. I don't have to buy the food, all that kind of stuff. But we also know there are critical times when you need to have those face-to-face interactions. And so we space them out throughout the year. But when we bring our leadership team together, and it's more than just the principals, we have superintendents, area directors, managers, in a very, because we're centrally organized. So we have many different teams of individuals that work in the Catholic board. We bring them all together. And when we have that meeting, we shape our meeting around the 4 priorities, and they see it. It's right there, front and center. Okay, folks, we're talking now about faith formation, and they get it. And the pin that I wear is a constant reminder, not only of our love of Jesus, because it's a heart with a cross through it, but it's also a reminder of our 4 colors and the 4 board priorities. So everything kind of fits together, and I think we've done a great job. And once again, I attribute our success to the power of team to remind people this is what we're all about in the Calgary Catholic School District.
That's a great story, and there's so many lessons to learn about that cohesion and not getting sidetracked or caught up in all kinds of things that education naturally brings us. I mean, every day teachers are making hundreds of decisions. You are making hundreds of decisions, but the work to kind of keep it focused is challenging, but something that you've obviously been a big priority for you. You did mention earlier about talked about student success and talked about failure. I was going to ask you if you had any examples, or as you reflect back, whether it's through your superintendency or previous positions that you've held, can you think of an example of a failure that you'd experienced, that you had, that you learned from and grew out of?
Great question. I don't know if failure is the right word to use. I'm not sure the word, but the one example that I'll share with you, as when I first came into the position, like my parents always said to me, if you want to be successful, you need to surround yourself with successful people. Like you need to have the right people in the right position. And I'm a big fan of what's called shepherd leadership. And one of the principles of shepherd leadership is that you need to cull the flock. So, like in a very large organization of 6,000 people, and in education, being in a Catholic district, we seem to have this mentality that you're going to make it work with the people that you inherit. So as a leader, you're given these people and you're going to have to make it work with those individuals. And so that really didn't buy into me. Like, I prefer the shepherd leadership approach, where there's some people that you maybe need to cut loose and get the right person in a particular position. And so as I started my term, I did let go several individuals. And I still think that that was a good decision to let those people go. I have no regrets in doing what I did. But the part that was or could be seen as the failure is additional work then was put on the backs of some of the key people that I relied upon, and that extra layer of stress, where if they never had that, they may have been even more successful in doing the things they needed to do. So I guess what I learned from this is the importance of, if you're going to make those changes, and once again, I support, I think that is a responsibility of a CEO, is to make those important changes that aren't easy. Like, let me tell you, folks, it's never easy when you have to bring someone into a meeting and the meeting is all about terminating their employment when they've been with an organization for 20 plus years, or even 30 years, right? Never an easy thing, but sometimes that's the best thing for an organization, because then you can hire someone that is more aligned with your principles, way of thinking, and moving forward. And I have to say a caution there too. You don't want everyone on your team to think the way you think, right? Like, you need to have divergent thinkers, but you need to have, what I'm trying to say here is, you need to have the right people in the right position. And when you do shrink down your central team, and this is what, if I had a chance to do it again, I would have rehired individuals sooner to take off some of the pressures that I placed upon some of the other leaders in my organization. So it really comes down to the timing of things. I think we're in a great place right now. Like, I'm proud to say that I do believe I have the right people in the right positions now in the Calgary Catholic School District. And we continue to work every day with joy and making a difference for the students and families in Calgary Catholic.
Well, and I love that example, Bryan, because I think it speaks to sort of the nuance of it. We often want to label something as a failure or a success when there's nuances in there. That the success was the strategy, the idea around culling, but the implementation had some flaws in it that needed to be tweaked and changed. And I think that's good modeling. I think that's really powerful. And by the way, I just wanted to give also a shout out to you for your vlogs on your site. I think I think the visibility of somebody in your position, especially in the size of your district, is so important. And so the way I just watched several of the little vlogs that you post, pretty regularly, it really highlighting diverse individuals and programs. You get I'll encourage people to check those out, because you really get a good sense of, wow, there's a lot of different things happening, and the way in which you highlight those people. You're not the star of the show. You're trying to shine a light on the goodness of the students and the teachers and the support staff and trustees, all kinds of individuals. I just thought that was a really powerful leadership. So I just wanted to give you a congratulations on that. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that vlog series around how you decide what to do, or what's your intent around that, but I think is a really, really positive thing you're doing.
Well, thank you for the kind words. And I think it goes back to creating Calgary Catholic together. And if we're going to create it together, you need to know some of the players in the game. And so that's why it's so important that, we create these little vlogs. They're like 2 minutes long. Kudos to our communications team led by Felicia Zaninga. She's my director of communications. And so her team, they create these things and we post them. And it goes back to that bigger question that you're asking me about the mission and the vision. Like, I think as the face of an organization, you want to make sure that people know you. There's an awesome book I would highly recommend by Cameron Herold. It's called Vivid Vision. And in his book, he talks about, imagine if you were to have the money to buy your most beautiful vacation property. What attributes, what would it look like? And if you were trying to describe this to a friend or a relative, you would want to share all of the aspects of it. Well, that's the same thing with your mission and your vision. It's important that I, as the leader of the organization, and my team, were able to describe the most beautiful education system, not our vacation home, but imagine now it's it's Catholic education. We need to make sure people understand it. And so to understand it, they need to know the players in the game, the architects, the builders, everyone who's working on creating this system. And linked to that, another thing that came to mind is when we talk about COVID, and one of the things that emerged out of COVID, communication, communication, communication. And so I also publish a weekly newsletter that goes to every school, 118 schools. And that was unheard of in our school jurisdiction. And I think it's still unheard of in many jurisdictions across Canada. But I still do that to this day because it brings about continuity from one school to the next. So you may have children in an elementary school, and you may also have a high school student at the high school. Well, they get my Friday newsletter. I send it home every Friday afternoon, and we actually track like how many people are reading it, and it's in the tens of thousands, which is fantastic. It's going to over 100,000, but for it to be in the tens of thousands, hey,
Sure.
I'm okay with that. And we have important dates, and we outline other things that are happening in the school jurisdiction. So communication through the newsletter and communication through things like the vlog that you mentioned are absolutely key of helping you move closer to that mission, to the
That's right.
vision, what you're
That's
trying to
right.
achieve in your school jurisdiction.
Absolutely. I know, totally agree. Hey, you've already mentioned a number of books, and even in our previous conversation, I think you probably mentioned 2 or 3 books. So I know you're a voracious reader. What if outside of the ones that you already mentioned, is there a one that you would recommend, or just even share that you're reading right now? And it doesn't even have to be professional. It could be just something for personal enjoyment. But can you give us a book recommendation?
Well, I'm going to give two, and one's a funny story here. You asked about the most current book I'm reading. I'm just going to grab it here. I'm going to tell you how it came about. So yesterday I was over in this. Yesterday is the first day of school. The media is all over you, right? And so global news, TV, CTV news, and then CBC radio. So I'm at the radio studio, sitting in the waiting room, and there's this lady in the waiting room with me, and we start a conversation. I said, "Oh yeah, like what are you in for, and what's your topic and stuff?" And her name was Kaylee, and so Kaylee has on her lap some books, and we start talking, and she's here to talk about her book. And so she gave me a copy of her book, and it's called Make Money Your Thing. And she talks about, she wrote this book for women. And so I started talking to her about in our district, we also made Women in Leadership Committee, and we're helping women who are aspiring in leadership, like possibly to move forward as a principal or assistant principal, what have you. We bring them together and we talk about some of the challenges that women have that us men never had as we moved up the ranks, right? And so she wrote this book all about money. And so she said, Bryan, I really wrote the book for women. I said, hey, I need to understand what what they're learning and stuff. So that is that's the
That's
book that I'm
cool.
going to be reading next. But the second book that I want to share with people, which is right on here on the corner of my desk, it's called The Way of the Shepherd. So The Way of the Shepherd. And it's a very short read. It's not a big book. Dr. Kevin Lehman and Bill Pentak wrote the book. And essentially what it's all about is an individual in this book gets a leadership position and is now put in the role of managing people. And that is kind of outside his comfort zone. And so he relies upon a good mentor, a professor that he knew or he knows, and who also has a flock of sheep and a small farm. And he says, well, if you come and meet me on my farm on the weekends, I will help you learn how to manage people. So essentially, way of the shepherd leadership, like how can you lead people the way that Jesus did, with compassion, but also, in the book, he talks about, the staff of direction and the rod of correction, right? Like, when you're supervising and working with people, there's going to be those tough conversations. There's going to be times when you have to call the flock, like I talked about earlier. And so highly recommend that, especially if you're in a faith district or a Catholic district, then you'll want to definitely check that book out. So those would be my two recommendations.
Any guilty pleasure that you're watching right now? I don't know if there's a binge series that you like. I always like to know what people, when they're not trying to be great leaders, which is obviously a big passion of yours, any kind of escapism stuff that you just, this is my sort of downtime that I like to watch, or maybe people don't watch. I don't know.
You know, on Netflix, there is a series called Love is Blind.
Yeah.
And, it's talking about individuals who, have been challenged in life and to find, a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And I think, lots can be learned from watching that show. And
Yeah.
so my wife and I quite enjoy, kicking back on the couch and watching that series. And, you sometimes, a tear comes to your eye when you see the joy and love of people coming together.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good one. I've watched a few episodes of that as well. My last question. So Calgary is a pretty dynamic city. You've got mountains. You've got, it's a metropolitan space. But I always like to know if there's besides, go to Banff or, check out whatever, are there some lesser knowns or hidden gems in Calgary that if I were to come visit, you'd say, oh, you might enjoy this, check this out, whether it's a restaurant or an outdoor space or just something. What are your kind of hidden gems in Calgary?
Well, everyone who comes to Calgary, they want to go to Banff, right? As you mentioned. So Banff and Canmore are very hot tourist places, and it takes about an hour and 15 minutes to get to the town site of Banff from Calgary. But I'll tell you a big secret. The next Banff, the next Canmore, is called the Crow's Nest Pass in southern Alberta. It's a 2-hour drive away from Calgary. It is... the Crow's Nest Pass consists of 5 little towns in the mountains. They have little breweries going on there. There's a few nice restaurants, magnificent mountains without all of the crowds and tourists that you see in Banff. So my wife and I, we actually own a little acreage there. And over the last couple of years, we've just seen the towns are just growing now, but it's still lesser known. And so if you come to, Alberta, definitely check out Southern Alberta would be my recommendation.
Excellent. Yeah, actually drove through there this spring on a golf trip. So that was my first time through that area. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. So I'll definitely put that on my list. Well, thank you, Bryan. There was just so much goodness here. Feel like we should come back together again and talk and continue some of this stuff because there's just some really good lessons learned. So I appreciate your leadership in Calgary Catholic. All the best in the school year. And and let's keep talking.
No, I would love that. Thank you, Dean, for this opportunity, and thank you to all the listeners out there. And people, I can be reached easily. You can find me, on the internet there through our school jurisdiction's website, Calgary Catholic. And if you have any follow-up questions, reach out and ask. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's so appreciated. Thank you.